Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my favorite video to film every year. Today is Anne's Choice Awards. These are the awards that I am handing out to books that I read in the year of our Lord 2025. I will go through books by the stats. Those are completely objective awards. And then I will go to get a little bit more subjective and have some awards for the various genres and types of books that I read, different categories. And then even more subjectively, I'm going to hand out randomly some awards for the way that I responded to books. So sit back and relax. I hope you enjoy this award ceremony. Without further ado, let's get started. In our first category of By the Numbers, we have some awards that you may have already heard about if you watched my stats video, which I will link to. In there, I mentioned some of these, so bear with me or just skip to the next chapter. There are a couple of new ones I hadn't mentioned there, but anyway. For the longest book, the award goes to The Count of Monte Cristo.
Yay!
Nothing further needs to be said. I mean, this chunker is, let me look. Including all the footnotes, it's 1,276 pages or something, but the actual story is, I would like to give you an accurate number, 1,243 pages. Definitely the longest book I read this year. I read a few chunkers, but this one tops them all. And the shortest book, I don't have a copy of it because actually I read it online, and that is Jane Austen's poems.
Yay!
Jane Austen was not necessarily a poet. She just wrote poems for fun, and people have collected them. You can purchase volumes of her poetry. When you do purchase a volume of her poetry, it comes up to a grand total of 28 pages. So that was the shortest book I read this year. The most popular book that I read this year. Now, by popular, it means the most people who have also read this book besides me, out of the books that I read this year. And again, pretty sure for the third year running, this is the third year I'm doing these awards. For the third year running, the book I'm going to mention is a classic. I don't read a lot of popular literature, or popular books, so it's no surprise that the books that are the most popular that I have read are ones that have been around a long enough time that a lot of other people have also read them. And that book this year is Pride and Prejudice.
Yay!
And this annotated version by David M. Shepard is the one that I read. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. As always, this was my third or fourth time reading it. I know why it's popular. It's a great book. If you haven't read it yet, read it. And of course, we have a most popular book. We also have a least popular book, which doesn't mean it's the lowest rated book. It just means it's the book that the fewest people know about. It hasn't really made its way in the world, so to speak. And that book was Prayer, Care, Share.
Yay!
Prayer, Care, Share is by Dr. Dave Earley and Dr. David Wheeler, and it is a handbook for churches and church members on methods of outreach, personal, interpersonal outreach, how to reach your neighbors, how to reach your friends, how to reach your hairdresser, etc., how to reach people, how to show them that you care, how to show the love of Christ to them, and how to win them to the gospel by God's grace. So it was very good, very practical, but also very inspiring and very informative as well. And I really enjoyed it. And I think that more people should read it, so it won't be the least popular book anymore. I added 2 categories this year to this portion of the awards ceremony, and that is the oldest book I read and the newest book I read. And the oldest book I read award goes to had talent for that one. The oldest book I read award goes to The Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yay!
Now, I saw conflicting things as far as what this book dates to. I saw 2100 BC and 1200 BC. So I don't know if somebody was dyslexic and flipped those, or if nobody really knows. But let's just say it was 1,000 or 2,000 years before Christ was born, and so it's really old. That is the oldest book I read this year. And the newest book that I read, the most recently published book that I read, I do not have a copy of. I borrowed it from the library. Yes? Or no, I read it on Kindle Unlimited. And that is My Merry Mistake by Courtney Walsh.
Yay!
And I read that at Christmas time. It was a Christmas novel, and it was a romance. It was fun. It was great. I enjoyed it. I buddy read that with Jeanette at Jane Reads, and we both enjoyed it. So that was the newest book that I read. In this portion of our awards ceremony, we have categories like classics, fiction, nonfiction, Christian fiction, historical fiction, etc. I added a few categories this year. I removed a few categories this year. It always changes a little bit reflecting on what I actually read in the past year, because it does change from one year to the next, what I read more of or less of. The genres I read the most of this year, I believe, were classics and historical fiction and romance novels. And we could put Christian fiction in there too, is kind of like a overarching, like there's multiple different categories within Christian fiction, but so I read a lot of those as well, so that will be a category. I also read more mysteries this year than I have in the past, so I added that as a category. I took out children's books because I didn't really read many children's books. I read one or two, and then I read a couple YA books, but I didn't really read a lot of children's literature this year, so we're removing that. And I did a lot of rereading this year. When I was calculating this up, I didn't realize how many books I actually reread in the year 2025. So that is a category as well. And also I have poetry as a category. I removed short stories as a category because I only read one collection of short stories. So I removed that one, and I think that those are basically the changes that I made that were reflected in my actual reading this year. So let's get on to the awards. For the best Christian fiction, This Promised Land by Kathy Golke.
Yay!
This one was so good. Great book. Loved this book so much. And it was also published in 2025 in April. And I am so happy that I purchased a signed copy of it after I read it. And I just love this book. It has everything. It has some history, so it's historical fiction technically. It has family drama. It has a tiny smattering of a romance thread in it, but it's not a romance novel by any means. It has really great, deep spiritual truth that's woven throughout the whole story in a seamless way. And it's just really beautifully told. This Promised Land by Kathy Golke, very much enjoyed. And then I usually have a best general fiction category, but as I sorted through all the books that I read this year, of all the ones that ended up in the general fiction, which is as opposed to Christian fiction, is just regular old fiction, usually contemporary, not historical, not romance, like doesn't fit in any of those specific categories. And what ended up happening was every single book in that list actually had some kind of fantastical element to it. They weren't fantasy novels per se. They were more realistic than that by and large, but they did have strong fantastic elements to them, or fantasy elements to them, if you wish. Like there were things in the story that were not meant to be realistic. It wasn't meant to convey something that could actually happen. It was something outside the realm of normal human life experience. So, for example, The Keeper of Lost Things has a little bit of an element of a haunting almost, of a spiritual shadow, I guess, that kind of is hovering over the lives of the people in this story and like moving items and that kind of thing. And then the Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, there's supposedly this line of women that have like a special sixth sense, like a special gift, and how they use their gift is a big part of the story. It's not the main thrust of the story, but it's a big part of it. And A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventures, that one had a flying owl machine. It had like some steampunk elements to it that were, again, outside the realm of normal human lived experience, right? So they weren't fantasy books per se, but they all had like that little twist, whether it was a magical realism, whether it was steampunk, whether it was more mystical or spiritual sort of, I guess, in nature, whatever it was an otherworldly sort of addition to the story. All of them had that. So I made it the fantastical fiction category. So the winner in the overall winner in the fantastical fiction category is Divine Rivals.
Yay!
Which I love this beautiful cover, first of all. And the story, the plot itself was kind of whatever, but I really loved the beautiful prose and the writing, and the two main characters, I really loved them as well, and the way their story was woven together. I have some questions going into the second book. I'm not sure I'm gonna love the second book, so I haven't read it yet, but I would like to read it and wrap this duology up and see how I feel about it all together. But I genuinely enjoyed the gorgeous writing and the prose in Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. So that is my number one pick. However, I do have a runner-up in this category, and that is A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventures by Angela Bell.
Yay!
I buddy read this with Charlene at Coffee and a Book, and we both really enjoyed it. It maybe wasn't fully 5 stars for both of us. There were 1 or 2 elements that distracted from the overall enjoyment of the story. But in all, I find this one that I look back on and think of with feelings of enjoyment. And it's one that I would definitely recommend. This is the one that has some steampunk elements. It's got quirky, whimsical characters. It's not a realistic story at all, but I love the themes that it's exploring, and it's really well told. So this is the runner-up in the fantastical fiction category. And of course, I read a lot of classics this year. I think probably more than I normally do, at least in comparison to the others. So the book that I read that was the best classic novel that I read this year, my personal favorite, we've already been introduced to this one in this video. That is The Count of Monte Cristo.
Yay!
As I looked through the classics that I read, now, okay, caveat, ladies and gentlemen, caveat. Okay, so 2025 was the 250th birthday of Jane Austen. And also, I read all 6 of her novels. We have accepted those novels from the selection for this year because everybody knows that Anne loves Jane Austen and loves her novels. I already did a ranking video of my favorites of them. We are just removing them from the available options. We're just pretending that I did not read them all this year, and we're letting other books have a chance. Okay, so that's why. This one I really enjoyed. I enjoyed reading every page of it, even though, as discussed, it's the longest book that I read this year, but very much enjoyable. Loved The Count of Monte Cristo. And I do have a runner-up in this category as well. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yay!
I did not know that I would enjoy this book so much when I went into reading it. And I buddy read this with Faith at Faith and Books, and we both really loved it. Very impactful, very profound, short story. I wish it were longer. That's my only complaint about it, but it definitely packs a punch. As I mentioned, I reread a lot of books in 2025, including I finished up the Anne of Green Gables series, which I had started rereading a couple years ago in 2024, actually, 2023, I think. So I finished up the Anne of Green Gables series in 2025. I reread 15 books this year altogether. So that's crazy. I don't think I've ever reread that many books in a year. And also, I don't really want to do that again this year. I didn't realize I had reread that many. I don't really need to reread that many again. That feels a little bit like a waste of time. But at the same time, I really enjoyed all the rereads. So it was time well spent. So then again, it wasn't a waste of time. Still don't think I want to do it again. Anyway, out of the 15 books that I reread, my favorite was Clear. Rilla of Ingleside by Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Yay!
This book has my heart. This was a favorite for me when I was 13, 14 years old. And again, when I read it as an adult, and then again, when I read it just now for the third time as a fully grown, mature, middle-aged adult. At every stage of my life, it has been a wonderful book. Thoroughly enjoyed reading about Rilla and the family at Ingleside and Blythe and her family, all of them. I loved the humor, I loved the sadness, I loved how Lucy Maud Montgomery wove World War I into the story. It's a very fabric of this story. It's a huge part of this story. And so well done and so gripping, so emotional. I enjoyed this journey thoroughly. There is no runner-up in that category because Rilla of Ingleside just blew everybody out of the water. So moving on to the best poetry that I read. Now, I actually only read 3 poems / books of poetry or poetry collections. I already mentioned the Jane Austen poem collection that I read, but then I read 2 separate long-form poems, one by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and one by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And so both of those make an appearance as well. But the one that was my favorite, that topped the others, was Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
Yay!
I buddy read this one with Cheryl at Candlewick Library, and we both thoroughly enjoyed the beautiful, beautiful nature writing in this story. His description of the settings, it starts in Acadia and then it moves through the rest of the country, the early fledgling country of the United States of America, the colonies and the westward expansion. And it tells the story of some star-crossed lovers and their journey to find each other. And it's beautiful, beautifully told, tragic story, and I really enjoyed the reading of it. But there is a runner-up, and that is Enoch Arden by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now, don't you just love this adorable little pocket copy of that? I did not read it from this because it's kind of fragile, this little antique book. I have a collection of Tennyson poetry that I read it from, but this little antique copy deserves its day in the limelight, so I'm showing it to you. And this one, again, beautiful writing, absolutely. Tennyson's poetry is some of my favorite. And the story is a sweet story. Again, there's some tragedy in it. It reminded me a lot of Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. Has very similar story threads in it, but it was wonderfully told, beautifully told. It wasn't a very long read. You can see it's a short little book, but a long poem, and it was very, very good. I also read about 5 plays this year. I read the Oedipus plays by Sophocles, which was interesting, and I read Lover's Vows, and I read one other one, As You Like It by William Shakespeare. And of those, I definitely would say Lover's Vows by Elizabeth Inchbald.
Yay!
That was my favorite for sure. It was funny. I listened this time on LibriVox, a recording of it, and there were actors for each voice. And so they acted it out, some more successfully than others. Some of the audio was inconsistent, but overall that experience I really enjoyed. It added another layer to the book. The last time I read it, I had simply read it, and listening to it being performed as a play just made it that much more enjoyable. It was funny, it was sweet in spots, tender in spots, and it really set the groundwork for reading Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. As I mentioned, I read more mysteries than normal, 5, so which some of you are gonna be like, 5? I read like 90 mysteries in a year. But it's not like a go-to genre for me. I don't hate it, but it's not like something that I pick up. Historical fiction is definitely my favorite. But I did read 5 mysteries this year, a mix of cozy mysteries and also like, you know, detective or crime novel sort of things. And the one that rises to the top, for sure, Was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie.
Yay!
And this is my favorite Agatha Christie to date. And it is also my favorite mystery book that I read this year, bar none. It was gripping. It was tense. It had me trying to figure out who did it. The ending was like what you thought maybe, but it was like, how could that possibly be? And then, it gets all explained in the ending. It's like, So the ending is, I don't know that it's like a shocking twist or whatever, but it is a bit of a twist. Anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed this. Agatha Christie wrote, I don't know, I feel like it's the perfect mystery novel right here. Really loved it. And I loved that format of the story so much that I read The Murder at Misselthwaite Manor by A.J. Skelly in December, and it was based on this type of story. It was a very similar type of mystery story, suspense, etc. And I enjoyed that one also. It was different setting, and obviously different characters, but same basic concept. That one had a happy ending, so that I liked that, but Agatha Christie, And Then There Were None, definitely a top favorite. But I do have a runner-up in that category, and I want to read more by this author, and that was The Appeal by Janice Hallett.
Yay!
I don't have a copy because I borrowed it from the library, but I read that for Epistolary January last year, thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a mystery that a lawyer and his two lawyer students are trying to unravel, and they're working through documents and text messages and communications between various people in the story and piecing together all of that paper trail of clues to arrive at the solution to the mystery. So I found it very interesting and absorbing, and I really enjoyed that style of telling the mystery, and I enjoyed uncovering the clues as we went along, and it was a great story. Out of 13 romance novels, these are novels that are specifically telling the story of a romance. They're not like books with a romance thread. These are straight up romance novels. And so I read 13 of those, and of them, my favorite one was Positively Penelope by Pepper Basham.
Yay!
Who always writes really great romance novels. So if you enjoy romance novels, but you like them to be clean, then Pepper Basham is a great recommendation that I have. It's the only book I read by her this year. I read it again for Epistolary January last year because it does have an epistolary format, and I did thoroughly enjoy it. It was fun, it was funny. Now, Positively Penelope is the winner in this category, but overall, it doesn't really stack up much against the books that I read. A lot of the romance novels that I read this year were just kind of meh. They were mid, they were forgettable, and some of them were downright awful. So yeah, it was a mix. It was a mix, and none of them really rose to the top. However, my Christmas reading was great, and I read like 3 or 4 romance novels at Christmas time that I really thoroughly enjoyed. They're really only readable at Christmas time, which is unfortunate, but they were very well written and I enjoyed them thoroughly. So I want to mention a couple of those now. The first one is All's Fair in Love and War by Sarah Monzon. It was very good. It was contemporary. It was a workplace setting. It was a funny, laugh out loud moments. The humor was really well done. Sometimes humor falls flat for me in rom-coms, but this one, it hit the mark and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the themes in the story and the way the characters were brought together. It was great. And then also The Christmas Book Flood by Roseanne M. White. I just really enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the setting, being in Iceland. And it was just a really sweet read at Christmas time. It wouldn't really work anywhere else. Neither of those would not really work any other time of year so much. Reading them at Christmas is kind of what gives them a lot of their charm. So that's why I didn't put them in first place, but I did really enjoy them. And then the last genre that I have that I want to mention is best historical fiction, which is my favorite genre. And I did read some really good ones this year, and it was kind of hard to pin it down to one, but this one definitely blew me out of the water, and that was not intended to be a pun, but well, let me show you. Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys.
Yay!
This book had me in a chokehold, as they say. Compelling from chapter 1. This, by the way, is a great time to read it. Very icy setting. very wintry, and it will take you on a journey with these characters, a journey that increasingly looks bleak and dim at the end, and there is a significant tragedy involved, which you can probably guess by the cover, but it is so gripping, and I couldn't put it down, and it was an emotional read, it was a heavy read, but it was a good read. Thoroughly enjoyed Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. But I do have a runner-up in this category as well, and that is The Berlin Letters by Catherine Ray. And I really loved that one as well. I loved the setting. It was in part in Northern Virginia, DC area where I'm from, but it was also in part in East Germany, set during the Cold War, or towards the end of the Cold War, really, and towards the end of the, what do you call it, the disunification of Germany, and set around the time when the wall came down, etc. It was so good, so well researched, so well written. There were also a lot of letters. It was very epistolary in nature, so that would be a good one to read in January. And I just love my experience with that book, and it made me think a lot about things that happened in my lifetime in that part of the world, and so it was very interesting to me. So now we're going to move on to the categories of books in the way that I personally responded to them. So these are very personal categories, but some of this might resonate with you and be a recommendation for a book if you think that you would enjoy it in this way as well. So to begin with, let's get the bad stuff out of the way first. The most disturbing book that I read. And actually, I had a couple options for this one, but we'll go with the first one. The Indifferent Stars Above by The Harrowing Saga of the Donner Party by Daniel James Brown.
Yay!
Wow, this was very hard to read and very disturbing on multiple levels. However, incredibly well written, incredibly well researched, and in the end, a book I was so thankful to have read. If you are in the mood to just like really sit and grapple with something and to really dig into the history of something, then this book will fit that bill. It's also incredibly well written. So highly recommend, even though it's hard to read, The Indifferent Stars Above. But I have to say, I have a runner-up. The Oedipus Plays by Sophocles.
Yay!
The things these characters get up to in these plays, disturbing. We're just gonna leave it at that. Moving on to something much more cheerful, the funniest book that I read this year. This was a reread for me, and this book had the most laugh out loud moments ever. Let me show you the book I'm talking about. Rainbow Valley by Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Yay!
There were some scenes in this book that made me laugh so hard out loud that I had to read them aloud to my husband and my children because they needed to share in the joy of the humor along with me. I couldn't keep it to myself. So fun. Love this book. And as you can see, another good read for January because we've got, some ice and snow going on. Now this book, like all of the others in the Anne of Green Gables series, moves through multiple seasons. So it doesn't stay in winter, but there are some wintry scenes in it. Anyway, it was very funny. Thoroughly enjoyed. And the saddest book that I read in 2025. Thankfully, I didn't read a lot of sad books, honestly. There weren't a lot of books that made me cry, but there were a couple that, as I was looking through the list of books that I read this past year, I definitely remember shedding some tears. The first one is Rilla of Ingleside by Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Yay!
I cried. I definitely cried. There are multiple places in this book that will bring you to tears. Multiple. They're living through a war, and they're dealing with all of the struggle that comes with that. They're dealing with the grief and the loss and the sorrow that comes with that. And Rilla, even though she's a young woman, is not accepted from that. She has to experience it along with everybody else. And it is tragic at times and harrowing at times. And it did make me cry on multiple occasions. So Rilla of Ingleside wins that category. But I do have a runner-up in that category, an honorable mention, and that is Of Love and Treason by Jamie Ogle.
Yay!
I also read that as a buddy read, and that one definitely had some scenes that made me cry. It is about St. Valentine, and St. Valentine meets a tragic end, so that's not a spoiler. We all know what's going to happen to him at the end of his life. But it was very sad reading. It was very touchingly written, and so that is my runner-up. And for the heaviest book, this is a unique category. It's not necessarily a book that made me sad. It's not really a book that disturbed me in the way that The Different Stars Above did, but it is a book that was heavy to read because of the subject matter. And I did read a few of those this year, but the one that came to mind when I was thinking about this category was The Fall of Marigolds by Susan Meissner.
Yay!
I don't have my copy anymore, which is not to say that I didn't enjoy reading it. I really did. I buddy read it again with Alma, and it was very impactful because the story, well, there's two timelines, and one of the timelines takes place at 9/11 in New York City. And that was the part that was really hard to read. But the historic timeline, it was a dual timeline story. The historic timeline was also dealing with a very tragic time in New York City. And one character in particular, her very tragic experience, her trauma during that tragedy, and it was just heavy. There was a lot of heaviness in the book. Ultimately ended with hope, but it was still hard to read through it. And plus there were things going on in the world at the time that just made it very, even that much more heavy and difficult to read. The most boring book. Now, when I say boring, I mean the book that I had to force myself to pick it up and read it and push through it. There were quite a few books this year that maybe I experienced that in places, like here and there. I would have to push myself to read it, but there was enough compelling in them, or, you know, I want to find out what happens, etc., that I would keep reading. This one had the least of that. It's not that it was a slog to read it, but it wasn't really moving very fast. There were a lot of words, a lot. It was, I think, the second longest book after The Count of Monte Cristo. And there just wasn't enough in the plot to justify all of those words. So that is Cecilia by Frances Burney.
Yay!
Not that I hated it. I didn't hate it, but it took me a bit to get through it. It took me a little bit of forcing to read it. It did make me a little slumpy, I'm not gonna lie. So Cecilia by Frances Burney definitely goes in that category, unfortunately. As for the worst book, there were some contenders for this, let me tell you. There were some contenders. So yeah, the worst was definitely Shyamala by Henry Fielding.
Yay!
Which was a response to Pamela by Samuel Richardson. If Pamela was bad, Shyamala was worse. So Shyamala was, I did not need to waste the hour of my life that I wasted in reading it. Thankfully, it was blessedly short. So that's the only good thing about it. The only good thing about it. The point of Pamela, by the way, went over Henry Fielding's head like this. I'm just gonna say. But there was another contender for this book, and this one, apologies to anybody who has read this book or this author and loved it. I buddy read this one also, and we both hated it. And we kept hoping for better things, and there were some things we wanted to find out happened and how they resolved, but in the end we probably should have DNF'd it because we just didn't love it. And I actively hate some things about this book because they're terrible. They're terrible things that shouldn't be in a book. Yeah, so yeah, did not like the book. Did I say what it was? Westering Women by Sandra Dallas.
Yay!
Did not like it at all. The next category is a much lighter category, and that is the most romantic. This is the book that gives me all the warm fuzzies. And honestly, I didn't read a lot of that this year. As I said, the romance reading was kind of meh. This one was not a romance at all, but it was the one that gave me the most feelings of, oh, what a beautiful love story. And that was The Frozen River by Ariel Lahan.
Yay!
And romance is not the main idea of her story. However, I genuinely enjoyed her depiction of the relationship between the husband and wife in this story. And we have two middle-aged characters who have been married a long time, who have a lot of history together, and they have grown children together. They have a large family. They're busy with life, but their relationship was just so beautifully depicted. I loved it. Definitely, easily the most romantic of the books that I read this year. My next category is The Biggest Surprise. This was the book that I didn't have expectations of. I just picked it up randomly and ended up really, really, really loving it. And that was A Merry Christmas by Elizabeth Johns.
Yay!
Again, I had some really great Christmas reading this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. The beautiful, lyrical, poetic prose just was, I just savored each morsel of it. I just enjoyed the writing of it. The actual story, who cares? The writing was beautiful. I loved it. The story was fine. Like it was great. It wasn't like a plot that I would tell you about and you'd be like, oh, I really want to read that sort of thing. It was like, you know, your run-of-the-mill romance novel kind of thing. But that paired with really, really exceptionally beautiful writing. That's the part that I loved about it. And that's the part that was a surprise to me. On the flip side, the biggest disappointment. This was a book that I had some expectations of. I had some expectations of enjoying it. And or I can take it another direction, which I kind of did this year. A book that I was a little bit disappointed with the turns that it took, because I wanted it to go one way and the book went the other way. And I'm gonna say it, and I have to have some caveats here. It's not that I actually am disappointed in the book itself. I still have hope for the future. But Emma M. Lyon.
Yay!
The last couple volumes that I have read, I have not liked the direction the story has gone with her love interest. That man has so many red flags. Pierce, the guy in the story. If you read it, you know. So many red flags. And I'm like, Emma, no. I want to scream in her ear. I want to shake her. I want to shake him also because he's making terrible life choices. Terrible. So yeah, red flags all over the place, but I'm pretty sure the story is not going to end there. So I have hope that it will eventually be resolved and in a good way. So I have hope for the future. So I'm not disappointed in the books themselves. Really, I'm going to keep reading. I'm very interested in reading them. I love them all, 5 stars, etc. But I am a little bit disappointed with the way things are at the moment. And then another one was I had gotten a bunch of Regency romance novels from my sister, and it was an author whose name I recognized, Elizabeth Mansfield. I think she was just like a vintage Regency clean romance novel. And so I didn't have high expectations. I wasn't expecting like classic literature or anything. I wasn't expecting to be blown away by excellent writing or anything like that. I just wanted a good Regency romance novel just to sit and enjoy and relax with. And I didn't get it. I got terrible love stories. Terrible, toxic love stories that shouldn't be happening. And they weren't meant to be. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that genre of story, you know, which I avoid with a 10-foot pole. They were supposed to be like really romantic love stories. And I'm sitting there thinking, ew, no, I don't like it. So I was disappointed by those. I read 2 different ones, and then I'm like, I have one more book by her that I want to try. That's it. And finally, those are all the fiction categories. I do have a couple of nonfiction books that I want to mention as well, winners of nonfiction category. The first one is Best Overall Nonfiction, and that is, one of them is a book I've already mentioned, and that is The Indifferent Stars Above.
Yay!
And I've already said a lot about it, but this is one of the best nonfiction books I've read ever, let alone last year. But the honorable mention, which was also an excellent nonfiction book, was Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney.
Yay!
I buddy read this with Cheryl, and we both thoroughly enjoyed. We had so many great discussions about what we were reading in this book, and I added so many books and authors to my TBR. It's not even funny. This book gave me extra understanding and ability to appreciate the mysteries of Udolpho when I read it later in the year after reading this one, and it made it a such better reading experience than I had expected it to be. So I am very grateful for the work that Rebecca Romney did in discovering these talented female authors from Jane Austen's time and before, and bringing them to a modern audience so we can enjoy them for ourselves. And then in the Christian nonfiction category, the winner was 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Toni Reinke.
Yay!
This book was very convicting, but it also had a lot of practical advice and it was very encouraging. I should probably read it again, to be honest, because, you read it and you're like, oh yes, I totally agree, I should make some changes. And then, you go back into your usual habits. I should read it again or at least skim through and read my highlights and be reminded again about the importance of being aware of how the phone changes my daily life and not letting it change it for the worse. And out of 6 Christian nonfiction, actually I read 14 nonfiction altogether, 8 just regular general nonfiction and 6 Christian nonfiction. Of the 6 Christian nonfiction I read, this was really the only standout. The others were fine. They were good. The Dawn of Redeeming Grace by Sinclair Ferguson was another one that was really good. It was a Christmas devotional, but the rest of them were kind of, again, just meh. So I had some reading this year that rose to the top, but overall it was not my best year of reading ever. However, I did have some really amazing reads. I don't have a best book overall category because as I look at the different titles that rose to the top in the different genres, they were all really very good and favorites for different reasons. So consider them all my best book of the year. There's 5 or 6 or 7 of them that definitely vie for the top spot, that could be in the top spot in any given day, Austen novels aside, of course, as we established in the beginning. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and in the comments, please let me know your thoughts on any of the books I mentioned, but also I'd love to know what were some of your favorite and least favorite books in 2025 and why. What did you love about them or what did you hate about them? Give me all the tea, and I'll talk to you in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.